When you woke up this morning, what was the first thing that came to mind? Maybe you were trying to decide what you should have for breakfast, what you should wear to work, or how to spend your day. These are the questions that many of us grapple with. However, many people wake up wondering if they will even survive the day. In Africa, 6,500 people across the continent are dying daily. This is equivalent to a village being wiped from the map every 24 hours. What is the cause? AIDS. I've taken an interest in Africa over the past couple years, and as a result, I've become more informed on the events that are taking place in these countries. A large percentage of people with AIDS are from countries in Africa. However, no one is exempt from this disease, and millions of people from the United States and all over the world have been and continue to become infected. In the past 30 years, the AIDS epidemic has taken millions of lives, predominantly in the continent of Africa. However, with the new medical advances, there are some promising efforts being made to combat this deadly disease. First, I will give you a basic overview of the AIDS epidemic and how it has had a worldwide effect. AIDS is a deadly disease, first discovered 30 years ago, that has turned into a worldwide epidemic. Reports show that HIV probably transferred to humans in Africa sometime between 1884 and 1924. The disease entered Haiti around 1966 and probably entered the U.S. around 1970. However, Western scientists and doctors remained ignorant of the growing epidemic until the 1980s. It all began in June of 1981 when a mysterious syndrome attacked the immune systems of 5 young men in California. These cases were later recognized as the first reported cases of acquired immunodeficiency syndrome in the United States. 30 years have passed since the discovery of this new disease, and it has claimed the lives of 30 million people, men, women, and children from around the world. In a June 2006 Associated Press article, Mark Sterling, a director for UNAIDS, called it the worst and deadliest epidemic that humankind has ever experienced. In a June 2006 report, the Center for Disease Control claimed that this disease has become one of the greatest public health challenges, both nationally and globally. UNAIDS statistics show that 34 million people are currently living with AIDS, and that approximately 2.6 million people were newly infected with the virus in 2009. Nearly 1.8 million people died of AIDS-related illnesses during the past year, and this is equivalent to a large city population such as Philadelphia. These numbers sound grim, but some progress is being made in the treatment methods and seems to be producing results. However, while AIDS seems to be stabilizing in some parts of the world, this is not the case in many developing nations. A May 2006 agency France Presse article reports that Africa is still grappling with sky-high rates and lags lethally behind the West. Sub-Saharan Africa remains the worst affected region in the world, as statistics taken from UNAIDS show that 60% of those infected with HIV live in these areas. AIDS is the leading cause of death in Africa, which has accounted for nearly half of all global AIDS deaths. Next, I will discuss what is being done to fight this disease and what the future may hold. While there is no cure for AIDS, antiretroviral drugs can help sufferers live a normal life. At the beginning of the 21st century, very few people in the developing world had access to HIV treatment. This was in large part because of the very high prices of ARVs and the international patents that stopped them from being manufactured at cheaper prices. However, access to ARVs has risen dramatically in the past 10 years. UNAIDS reports show that in 2001, just 240,000 people in developing nations had access to ARV. The number rose to 1.3 million in 2005. 6.6 million people received ARV therapy in low and middle income countries by the end of 2010. This is a 22-fold increase since 2001. Despite expanded access to ARV, a major treatment gap remains. In a BBC article published this month, Gabon's President Ali Bongo Ondimba said that resources available for Africa remain insufficient given the size of the HIV/AIDS impact on the continent. At the end of 2010, 9 million people who were eligible for treatment did not have access. A large number of African countries have conducted large-scale HIV initiatives in an effort to reduce the scale of their epidemics, but the disease continues to spread. For every one person starting treatment, 2 people become infected, and reports show that there are nearly 7,000 new HIV infections each and every day. In a 2006 speech, Dr. Peter Piot, UNAIDS Executive Director, said, "Since the beginning of the epidemic, stigma, discrimination, and gender equality have been identified as major causes of personal suffering and as major obstacles to effective responses to HIV. This includes discrimination aimed against people living with HIV, women, the poor, drug users, sex workers, men having sex with men, prisoners, migrants, and refugees." Designer Sarah Gamba created this poster to help fight against the stigma that comes with AIDS. It was originally created for the 2009 edition of the Good 50 by 70 poster competition that responded to this theme. Being HIV positive is not a criminal offense. Governments must focus on education and prevention of the disease rather than the repression. The designer employs her typographic message in the shape of the African continent because there is much criminalization of this illness there. In recent years, considerable energy and money have been spent trying to achieve universal access to treatment for HIV and AIDS. UNAIDS Executive Director Michael Sadib said, "We are at a turning point in the AIDS response. The goal towards achieving universal access to HIV prevention, treatment, care, and support must become a reality by 2015. Last week, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon called for global action to end the AIDS disease by 2020. That is our goal: 0 new infections, 0 stigma, and 0 AIDS-related deaths, Mr. Ban said last week at a UN summit. Mr. Ban stressed that new infections have dropped by 20% since 2001. This was the year when world leaders first pledged to act to control this epidemic. So, how is the U.S. supporting the fight against AIDS? While the weak economy has had a negative effect on funding, the U.S. continues to support the AIDS effort. The U.S. President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, also known as PEPFAR, is the U.S. government initiative to help save the lives of those suffering from HIV and AIDS around the world. This historic commitment is the largest by any nation to combat a single disease internationally. It currently supports treatment for over 3.2 million people, the vast majority of whom live in Africa. The UN and U.S. government have also begun an initiative to eliminate HIV in babies by 2015. The campaign seeks to treat pregnant women who are HIV positive. According to a BBC report, the joint initiative labeled Countdown Zero would cost about $2.5 billion to care for 15 million women. This is roughly double the number of women who are now being treated. In closing, I've discussed the many aspects of AIDS and what is being done to fight against it. In the past 30 years, the AIDS epidemic has taken millions of lives, predominantly in the continent of Africa. However, with the new medical advances, there are some promising efforts being made to combat this deadly disease. A decade ago, an AIDS diagnosis would be a death sentence, but over the years, things have changed. With the proper medication, most people with HIV can lead normal lives. Michael Sadib, UNAIDS Executive Director, said, "Access to treatment will transform the AIDS response in the next decade. We must invest in accelerating access and finding new treatment options. Although it may not happen in our lifetime, we can hope that there will someday be a cure for this horrible disease." I'll leave you with a short video clip about universal access. It was created for World AIDS Day 2010 by Avert, an organization that focuses on averting HIV and AIDS. Okay, so does anyone have any questions? Right.
How is AIDS spread?
AIDS is caused by HIV, which is a virus that can be passed from person to person. It's passed through sexual fluids, blood, and breast milk. And it's most often spread through sex, needles, like through drug use, and breastfeeding. Anyone else? Yes.
How does AIDS impact a person, having AIDS impact a person?
Well, there are a lot of impacts. Of course, there's the medical, which, they have to deal with. Their immune system is down, and they have to deal, they're more they're more likely to get diseases like TB and things like that. And especially if they haven't received ARVs, the drug that helps them, then I think they can die in up to 9 years because HIV turns into AIDS. And also there's the stigma, because the ways that you catch HIV, there's the stigma attached with it, discrimination. A lot of people have to deal with violence and things like that. And also the economic, a lot of times people with AIDS are sick, and so they can't work, and which, they don't have the money to live, and they have a lot of expenses with healthcare. Yes.
Why did you choose to focus on AIDS in Africa?
I chose to focus on AIDS in Africa because, a lot of times, you hear about, AIDS in Africa, and so it almost seems kind of generic, but I wanted to make people more aware of what was really happening because I think a lot of times we feel like it's outside of our realm, when really AIDS is everywhere. Like, it's here in the U.S., it's all around the world, but Africa has been hit the worst because it originated from that location. And also, there are a lot of people that don't have as much money there. You know, in the U.S. we have a lot more resources, and there they don't have the money to combat the disease. So they're kind of dependent on whatever money, like funding from other countries like the U.S. So I just wanted to emphasize how poverty plays a large role in the AIDS epidemic. Anyone else?
How has the AIDS epidemic impacted African countries?
I guess my first response would be, how has it not impacted? Because, 60% of the AIDS epidemics, 60% of the people with AIDS live in Africa. And we're talking about people who have no resources, they're already impoverished. And so then they get AIDS. And that a lot of times for a family that means that, because a lot of times the family, the mother is the main person, and she may have a lot of children. If she gets AIDS, especially if she doesn't get treatment, she can't work, she's sick all the time, and that affects the children because, a lot of times the children have to grow up and take care of the whole family when they're maybe 8 years old. So just the family life, economics, when you have so many people who are sick, all of your money goes towards healthcare, and you can't really focus on other aspects. Orphans, there are so many orphans in Africa because of all the people dying because they don't have the proper treatment. And also education. Because so many kids are orphaned, or they have to step up in their family, they aren't able to go to school. And so the process starts all over again. And I had looked up, I think I read that studies show that young people who have no education are 2 times more likely to catch HIV and AIDS. So that's a real push over in the African countries to educate people, to make them more aware, so that the process doesn't start all over again. Any more?
What can we do to fight the AIDS epidemic?
Well, obviously funding is one of the most important things. One of the goals, the goal has changed over the years. First, the goal was to end AIDS in 2010, but that didn't happen. And so now they pushed it back to 2020. There just is a lack of funding, because people have other things that they're dealing with, and so money is a big issue. But also, AIDS awareness, I would say, is one of the most important things, because if people are aware of what AIDS is, how it's spread, then it's more likely, it won't be transmitted to other people. So I would say funding, AIDS awareness, and prevention, which goes along with AIDS awareness. So promoting safe sex, needle exchange programs, things like that, so that other people aren't infected. Oh, and also I would say fighting stigma, because a lot of times, not only do people with AIDS have to deal with all of these other problems, but they have to deal with the stigma that is attached with having AIDS, because people classify them as, homosexual, sex worker, drug user, when, that's not the case. Anyone can catch AIDS, and all you have to do is, come in contact with blood or like some sort of fluid, and it's easily passed along. Okay, if there are any more questions, thank you for coming.